Marcus Thornhill wasn't supposed to be here. People like him wrote checks when problems appeared. But here he sat, adjusting his Breitling watch, treating a municipal courtroom like an inconvenient meeting. The 17 families who'd lost everything didn't have that option. Some were living in their cars, but Judge Caprio hadn't mentioned them yet. He was still looking at a single page, just one document. Thornhill noticed, but didn't care. "Mr. Thornhill, you're here regarding the Riverside Commons development." Judge Caprio's voice carried no inflection, a simple statement. Thornhill nodded like he was confirming a lunch reservation. "I am, Your Honor, though I'm not sure why this requires my personal appearance. My legal team has submitted all necessary documentation." Judge Caprio didn't respond immediately. He set the single page down, aligned it with the edge of the bench, perfectly parallel. Then he looked up. "The documentation is why you're here." Something in that sentence made the courtroom feel smaller. Thornhill had built his reputation on timing. 32 luxury developments across 4 states. Riverside Commons was supposed to be the crown jewel. 200 units, premium waterfront, returns that made investors salivate. The fact that demolishing existing buildings meant displacing working families was categorized under site preparation costs. Those families weren't mentioned in his marketing materials. "Your Honor, if this is about displacement logistics, I want to assure the court that Thornhill Development followed every legal requirement. We provided mandatory notice. We offered fair market value. Everything was by the book." He said it smoothly, the kind of answer that had worked in 12 previous hearings. Judge Caprio picked up the single page again. "Fair market value." He repeated the words like he was testing their weight. "You offered 17 families an average of $42,000 each for properties you'd appraised at $38,000. Exactly. Thornhill leaned forward slightly, sensing an opening. "We went above appraised value. We were generous. The appraisals were commissioned by your company." The CEO's smile tightened, just barely. "Standard practice, Your Honor. Independent appraisers following industry methodology." Independent. Judge Caprio set the page down again. Same careful alignment. "Mr. Garrett, could you stand, please?" An older man in the gallery rose slowly. His jacket was clean but worn. He didn't look at Thornhill. "Mr. Garrett worked as a property appraiser for 31 years, Judge Caprio said. He was one of 3 appraisers your company hired. Mr. Garrett, what was your initial assessment for 847 Riverside?" The older man's voice was quiet. $116,000, Your Honor. The property had been renovated. New roof, updated electrical, refinished hardwood. Comparable sales supported that valuation. Thornhill's lawyer started to rise. Judge Caprio raised one finger. The lawyer sat. "What was the final appraised value?" $34,000. Mr. Garrett's hands were shaking. "They told me to use distressed property comparables from 3 miles away. Said the methodology needed to be consistent across all units. When I refused, they reminded me they had 2 other appraisers who understood business priorities." The courtroom was completely silent. Thornhill recovered quickly. "Your Honor, appraisal methodology involves complex variables. Professionals disagree on approaches. We selected conservative estimates to protect investors from overvaluation risk." "Protect your investors." Judge Caprio wrote something down. His pen moved slowly. "The family at 847 Riverside, where are they now?" The CEO hesitated. "I'm not privy to the current location of every former tenant." "They're living in their 2007 Honda Odyssey," Judge Caprio said, "in a grocery store parking lot. The $42,000 you provided covered their deposit and 2 months' rent. Then their application was denied. Bad credit from a previous displacement. They've been denied 14 properties. Their daughter is 7, doing homework in a parking lot. Thornhill's jaw tightened. With respect, Your Honour, housing stability is not the responsibility of private developers. We operate within market conditions. We can't solve systemic housing issues. No one's asking you to solve systemic issues. Judge Caprio's voice remained level, calm. I'm asking about the specific issues you created. There was a difference between those two things. The courtroom felt it. The single page on the bench had more on it than Thornhill initially thought. Judge Caprio wasn't reading from it exactly. He seemed to have it memorized, but he kept returning to it, like an anchor point. You told the City Council that Riverside Commons would create 200 jobs during construction and 50 permanent positions afterward. Do you stand by that testimony? Absolutely. Thornhill found his confidence again. Job creation was solid ground, numbers he could defend. We hired local contractors. We're committed to community employment. You hired Baxter Construction Group. Correct. A reputable firm, based in Ohio. The CEO blinked. They have regional contracts. How many displaced families were offered positions? Silence. Mr. Thornhill, I don't manage Baxter's hiring practices. That's not what I asked. Judge Caprio's tone didn't change, didn't sharpen. If anything, it got quieter. You testified that this project would create community jobs. The community you displaced. How many were hired? Thornhill glanced at his lawyer. The lawyer was studying his notes like they contained escape routes. I would need to consult employment records. 0. Judge Caprio said it simply. Baxter brought their own crew from Ohio. The 50 permanent positions you mentioned are property management and maintenance. Roles requiring certifications none of the displaced residents possess. You created jobs for a community you destroyed, then hired people from somewhere else to fill them. The CEO's face was reddening. Your Honour, I'm a developer, not a social services agency. We followed every legal requirement. If the law doesn't mandate that we hire specific individuals, then we're free to make business decisions that serve our investors. You keep mentioning investors. Judge Caprio pulled out another document. Your prospectus projected $37 million in revenue over 5 years. Development costs were $19 million. That's $18 million profit. You saved $1.3 million using lower appraisals. Thornhill straightened. That's speculative mathematics. It's your prospectus. Judge Caprio slid the document across to the bailiff, who brought it to Thornhill's table. Page 47, your own projections. The CEO didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He knew what it said. The 17 families received $714,000 combined. The difference between fair compensation and what you paid is $600,000. That's $35,000 per family. Enough for deposits, enough for moving costs, the transition you legally owed but creatively avoided. We met our legal obligations. Thornhill's voice had an edge now. The smooth corporate tone was cracking. Every action was approved by city planning. Every payment was accepted voluntarily. Voluntarily? Judge Caprio leaned back. Miss Patterson, could you stand? A woman in her 60s rose. She wore a grocery store uniform. Ms. Patterson, you owned 6 and 12 Riverside for 19 years. Tell me about the voluntary nature of your settlement. Linda Patterson's hands gripped the bench. They gave us notice January 14th. 60 days meant March 15th, but they started construction March 1st. Thornhill's lawyer stood. Judge Caprio's finger rose. The lawyer sat. 2 weeks before the legal deadline. What happened when you didn't vacate early? The water got shut off. Her voice was steady. They said it was for construction safety, then the electricity. My grandson lives with me. He's 12, has asthma. When the heat went out, we had no choice. You took the settlement. I took the settlement. Linda Patterson sat down. The courtroom wasn't silent anymore. There was a sound, quiet, like collective breathing had synchronized into something heavier. Thornhill stood abruptly. Your Honor, these are business decisions made in complex development timelines. If utilities were interrupted, that's a contractor issue, not corporate policy. I can't be responsible for every operational detail. Sit down, Mr. Thornhill. The CEO sat. Judge Caprio picked up the single page again. This is an email from you to your project manager, dated February 7th, 6 weeks before the deadline. Would you like to read it, or should I? For the first time, Marcus Thornhill looked uncertain. I'll read it. Judge Caprio's voice was quiet. Early departures save us $12,000 per week in holding costs, expedite utility disruptions under safety pretenses, settlements finalized under duress hold up legally. Priority is timeline, not comfort. The courtroom felt like the air had been removed. Under duress, hold up legally. Judge Caprio set the page down. You didn't just know what was happening, you ordered it. You strategized it. You calculated that desperate people would take inadequate settlements rather than live without heat or water. And you were right. Thornhill's lawyer was whispering urgently. The CEO waved him off. That email lacks context. Development requires difficult decisions. Every major project in this city has faced similar challenges. Name one. The CEO stared. Name one project that deliberately disrupted utilities to force early departures. One project that hired appraisers, then pressured them to lower valuations. One project that promised community jobs and hired from out of state. Marcus Thornhill said nothing. 17 families. Judge Caprio's voice was soft. 17 families who built lives in those buildings, paid rent on time, maintained properties, raised children, created the kind of stable community that makes neighborhoods valuable. The same value you extracted for profit, the same stability you destroyed for efficiency. Judge Caprio opened a folder. This is the parking lot where the family from 847 Riverside lives. This is the shelter where Mr. Chen and his mother stay. This is the storage unit containing everything Ms. Patterson couldn't fit in her studio. Your development is 63% occupied. Luxury rentals starting at $3,200 a month. None of these families could afford the building that replaced their homes. Thornhill's hands were flat on the table. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine, I apologize. Business is hard. Development is complicated. Sometimes people get displaced. It's unfortunate, but it's legal. Legal. Judge Caprio nodded. You're right. Almost everything you did was legal. The appraisals, the settlements, the construction timeline, even the utility disruptions framed as safety measures. You found every loophole, exploited every ambiguity, stayed just inside the lines. The CEO started to relax, but this email, Judge Caprio tapped the page. This isn't legal. This is evidence of intentional fraud, deliberate coercion, conspiracy to deprive citizens of property rights through manufactured duress. This isn't aggressive business. This is theft dressed in construction permits. The color drained from Thornhill's face. I'm referring this to the district attorney for criminal investigation. All assets related to Riverside Commons are frozen pending review. You're ordered to pay immediate restitution of $35,000 to each family. That's the difference between what you paid and what you owed. Additionally, you're personally liable for their housing costs from displacement until they find stable, permanent housing. Thornhill's lawyer was objecting, citing appeals. Judge Caprio let him finish. Your client can appeal, but those families are getting checks by Friday. If Mr. Thornhill fights this, those funds go into escrow and accrue interest at 8% annually. Either way, they get paid. The courtroom was watching Thornhill now, watching him calculate. watching him realize that the thing he'd spent his career avoiding had finally happened. The cost of doing business had come due. You built an empire on finding the distance between legal and ethical, on exploiting the gap between what you could do and what you should do. You treated displacement like a line item, families like obstacles. You were so focused on what the law couldn't stop you from doing that you never asked if you should do it at all. Marcus Thornhill sat frozen. This
Court is adjourned. Surrender your passport to the bailiff. You're not to leave the state pending the DA's review. The gavel came down. Final. Clean. The CEO didn't move. He sat there, surrounded by lawyers, wearing a watch worth more than most settlements, and for the first time in his career, he had no calculation to make, no angle to work, no loophole to find. The families in the gallery didn't celebrate. They stood quietly, waiting to see if justice on paper translated to justice in practice. Sometimes the loudest statements are made in silence. Sometimes accountability arrives not with thunder, but with a single page of evidence and a judge who understood that legal and right are not always the same thing. Marcus Thornhill learned that difference the hard way. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside it was raining. The family in the Honda would hear about the decision by evening. For the first time in 9 months, they'd have options, not solutions, not restoration, but options. It's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes that's where justice begins. If stories of justice and accountability resonate with you, consider subscribing to Justice Talks. Together, we shine a light on moments where fairness prevails. Stay healthy, stay informed, and never stop believing in the power of truth.